Hi, I'm Alonso, and today I'm the guest.
And I'm Dan, and I despise Hallmark movies, but we're not really going to talk about that today. And this is the Deck the Hallmark podcast.
Deck the Hallmark, it's his podcast. Brandon and friends host his podcast. We hope you like this jolly podcast.
Oh boy, what a day it is. Welcome to Deck the Hallmark. Our Mystery Friday interview is none other than we made his deal, the Alonso Duralde. Alonso, how's it going, buddy?
Yes, thank you for meeting my very strict rider. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. We do the best we can. Bran is
Number one being no Bran.
Yeah, Bran is yes. Yeah, that is part of it. That's better than what I was going to say, which is normally when he's out, I say he hates the thing we're talking about. So Bran hates gay people, and you heard it here first.
Not true.
This is breaking news. Bran, we couldn't make his deal to interview Alonso. No, Bran is sick. He's got strep throat, and so wish him well. By the time this comes out, we'll hope that he's on the mend. But, you know, Alonso, you and I have been talking about movies, and I use that term loosely, over the course of the last 6-ish years together. And so it's not every day. It does happen, you know, I would say 3 times over the last decade and a half, but it's not every day that one writes a book about movies. And
this is true.
And you've done such a thing, and it comes out from the day people are listening to this. If you're listening to it on May 3rd, it comes out in 11 days, May 14th. And I have a copy of this book, and it is fantastic. It's Hollywood Pride. I want to make sure I get the subtitle right. A celebration of LGBTQ plus representation and perseverance in film. Alonso, how proud are you?
I'm can't, I'm pinching myself. I can't believe it's finally happening. Like, when you, as you know, from the process of when we did the book together, like they existed as a theoretical for so long. And it's just like a bunch of PDFs going back and forth and you're making notations and marks. And then one day that box arrives and you have it in your hand and it's like, so it's really happening now. There's no turning back.
Yeah. If you're like me, and this will be the end of the promo for the book until the end of the program, but if you're like me and you're already excited about hearing the soothing sounds of Alonso Duralde read you the book on Audible, great. You should get that copy, but get this copy too, because we got a copy from the publisher. It came earlier this week, and it's gorgeous. It looks great, a great coffee table book, and I'm excited to dive in and talk about that. But I don't know if you did this to get on the show, but you sent me and Bran a very nice text about how good of an interviewers we are. And
I realize in retrospect that looked conniving, but I actually meant it.
So you did.
I was listening to you guys talking to one of the When Calls the Heart Stars. I was like, these guys are good at this.
And you were like, Daniel, you're a good interviewer. Bran, not so much. Is there any way we could just get you? And I was like, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And then later in that conversation, we have an ongoing text thread. You were like, hey, you guys ever want to interview me? I'm like, of course we'd want to interview you. And so here we are. You're going to get the full DTH treatment. The only downside is I don't have an IMDb list of like movies that I can be like, why were you in the 5th Air Bud sequel? But you did like Jupiter Ascending. So I feel like there's going to be plenty of embarrassment to go around. Alonso, tell everyone, I know some of this, and this is kind of the difficulty for me with this, is that other people don't. Tell everyone where you're from, where you grew up, how you found your love of film.
Sure. I grew up in East Point, Georgia, which is suburban Atlanta, basically. And my parents were both Spanish immigrants. I'm the youngest of 7 children. And my mom really loved movies. And we would watch them on TV all the time. And every so often, when I was growing up in Atlanta, there was a repertory theater on the other side of town. And so every so often, it would be this rare treat that we would like pile in the car and go see like Rebecca or, some old Hitchcock movie or Wuthering Heights or something. When I was 11, I begged my mom to drive me there so that I could finally see Citizen Kane.
Classic.
Because I kept reading about it and hearing about it. I'd never seen it. It never seemed to come on television. And mind you, this is 1978, so the VCR is not a thing in the home yet for us anyway. So she was very understanding of like my own sort of nascent obsession with this stuff. And my oldest brother went to Harvard in the early 1970s, and there was a big sort of revival of classic Hollywood happening at that time. Like that's sort of where the Marx Brothers revival was born, and Casablanca and a lot of that stuff. It sort of started with like Harvard students. So he came home with all of these amazing books about, you know, Hollywood of the 30s and 40s that I was just eating up as a child. So yeah, I was a total weirdo and nerd, but you know, I had, you know, they always say like you go into a career, if it's going to be something like, if you want to be an actor or you want to be a singer, like one of those things where it's really hard and you've got to really stick with it, like don't have a plan B. And so I didn't have a plan B. Like this has always been my thing. So you know, sometimes I'm a film critic, sometimes I'm working at film festivals, but it's always
sometimes you're podcasting, and by sometimes I'm all the time.
Yes, sometimes I'm podcasting about Hallmark Christmas movies, because who knew?
The big time, as we call it. I do have a few follow-ups. One, what age, Alonso Duralde, are we talking about that's devouring Hollywood history books? I just for my own edification. How old are we
I'm
talking?
like 9, 10 years old.
Man, that is impressive. That's impressive.
You know, I was circling the TV guide when stuff was going to come on. You know?
Classic. No, Did you guys have cable? Were you cable or just like?
Not until like I was a junior in high school. So I mean, again, like we're years away from that. So I'm literally just like looking for on the afternoon movie is, you know, Notorious or, you know, Destroy All Monsters going to come on. You know,
classic again. What was the 11-year-old Alonso Duralde review of Citizen Kane? Like, did you get, spoiler alert, that the Rosebud? Did you get? I guess I won't say it. Aaron lunged like I was giving away national secrets.
This movie's only 80 years old.
Let's his childhood, people. It's the freaking sled. Like did you at 11? Were you there? Were you processing at that level?
Here's the thing. I knew that Rosebud was his sled because there's a Peanuts strip where they give that away, where Linus is watching Citizen Kane on TV, and Lucy goes, Rosebud was his sled. He's like, ah. So I went in knowing that. I mean, obviously I didn't get it in the way that I have come to in subsequent years. I was like, oh yes, I can see the influence of German expressionism, and you know, but I just knew that I was seeing something really special. And the thing I always say about Citizen Kane when people feel like it's too daunting, I'm like, it's one of the handful of classics that's a fun watch.
Yeah.
Like it's funny and it zips along. And so like whether or not you're sort of processing it as, the greatest American film ever made, like it's just a fun watch.
In my very like minimal experience teaching a little bit of film to some high school students, when they would talk about Citizen Kane, whenever they would say, I just feel like this has been done a lot better in other movies, I would always say that is you professing your love for Citizen Kane. What he's doing there, and that was when I didn't see it till college, and when I saw it, I remember just going, "Oh, this was like gripping and entertaining." But you know, and then I had a professor who was like, "No, it's way more than that. Here's why." And it took me a lot, but at 11, it would have been lost on me. I don't think I'd have been there with you at 11. And I like to think I like movies.
You know, look, I spent a lot of my life sort of teaching myself this stuff because this was before the internet, this was before cable. And so it was literally just like, you know, I liken it to, have you ever seen Searching for Bobby Fischer?
Oh yeah. Great movie.
So the kid sees like one game of chess being played in the park and like immediately comes home and recreates a chessboard with his toys. Like I was from a very young age, like I could tell you what was showing at any movie theater in a 5-mile radius of our house when I was about 4 years old. I wasn't even going to movies yet, but I was just the idea of it I found so thrilling. So it's just been this weird obsession my entire life. And thankfully I found an outlet for it.
I was completely with you until you said 4. When I was like 10, 11, 12, I would get the newspaper. I went to the movie theaters maybe a half dozen times before I was in middle school. We just didn't have a lot of money, but I would get the newspapers and I knew every movie theater in town. I knew where everything was playing. And then you said 4 and I was like, nope, that's all I got. And also, and I don't want to give your parents too much credit here, but the fact that you're the 7th kid and your parents or just still care. I like, you know, this the youngest of 7, Alonso, and that your mom is still dragging you across Atlanta. I don't know if I'd drag my kids across Atlanta. That's a
well, see, it's kind of the opposite. My siblings will tell you that like they got the tough disciplinarian, like unfun version of my parents, and by the time I showed up, they were like, yeah, whatever. You know, they were just too tired to bother with things. So yeah, they'll believe me. All of my siblings will tell you like how good I had.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure
baby.
They all will regale the family with stories of Alonso getting to do whatever he wanted. What any of your other siblings share even like a kindling, an inkling of your love for film?
Well, like I said, my oldest brother, the one who came home with all those books, like he's, he has other things in his life. He's, a retired doctor. He's a really incredible needle pointer, actually.
But did he know all the showtimes in Atlanta at 4? I don't think so.
He did not. But, he definitely we could talk about Greta Garbo or, MGM musicals or whatever. And he would, he knew what was going on.
Fantastic. So we leave, the friendly confines of Atlanta, and where do we go next?
So I went to college in Nashville. I went to Vanderbilt.
Oh, a little school called Vanderbilt. Got you.
Little school called Vanderbilt. Yeah.
It's just not even an academic institution. They're going to lose their university title any day now.
Diploma mill. So they they have one now, but they didn't have a film school at the time that I went there. And they didn't have a journalism school, and my goal was, to become a film critic.
So why did you choose the University of Phoenix at Vanderbilt?
Because I kind of overshot myself for colleges. And I applied for a lot of really, your Harvards and your Northwesterns. But
no, I got to stop you. I know I've been interrupting you a lot. I'm really sorry. Was Vanderbilt your safe school? Was Vanderbilt your safe school? Just say it out loud.
Oh. Okay, no, my safe school was University of Georgia, which was a lot easier to get back into. Nowadays,
it's
free,
getting
so everybody's super competitive.
I'm sorry, Georgia.
No, Vanderbilt was my semi-safety school because my older sister was there at the time.
Oh, okay.
So I was I had that going on. But yeah, it was low on the list of where I wanted to go, but it's where I went. And it wound up being great because a couple things. First of all, they let me make up a major. So I basically cobbled together as much sort of film and theater and writing classes as I could. But then also, it turns out that colleges that don't have journalism schools tend to have really good student newspapers because everybody who's writing for that paper wants to be there and isn't doing it as a requirement as coursework or whatever. So we had a really great paper. Unfortunately, it was named The Hustler. And as we said on our T-shirts, we had the name first. It dated back to the early 1900s.
You wrote for Hustler, is what you're saying.
Yeah, the Hustler.
That's right. Don't call it that.
So I got it was a great place to really just pump out reviews and learn the craft that way. Also, there was a campus radio station where I was DJing, so that was good for that certainly prepared me a lot for talking into a microphone now. And then also because we didn't have cable on campus yet, there was a thriving on-campus student-run cinema.
Okay.
And I got into that committee as my freshman year and was pretty much running it the last few years I was there. And that taught me how to book movies. So weirdly enough, people I have booked films from when I was in college, I still deal with in the world of indie cinema today. They're still out there. It's amazing. And also it taught me how to write blurbs for movies to make them see, to get people to want to come see them, which was a very useful skill when I went into the film festivals and you have to write those little short capsule descriptions to entice people. You've never heard of this movie, but you want to see it and here's why. So my coursework was kind of the least of it, but everything else that was happening on campus, I really learned a lot from. I got to direct a play at one point, which really taught me a lot about being on the other side of it and the decisions that get made.
You directed a play. What was the play called?
I did. It was David Mamet's Sexual Perversity in Chicago, which was turned into the movie about last night.
That David Mamet dialogue, easy to direct, really easy to direct in college students.
Yeah, well, I think, there should be a rule where if you haven't actually had sex yet, you probably shouldn't be able to direct a play called Sexual Perversity in Chicago. But no one told me that, so I plowed ahead anyway.
That was on the clipboard. Are you a virgin?
Yeah.
You are great. You're going to be perfect for this. This is going to be right up your alley. Here at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, so Vanderbilt was great for reasons having very little to do with my actual academic work, but the extracurriculars were great, and they all provided me with skills that I use to this day.
I've not done this when I interview most people, but because we're talking all about movies, I'm gonna at every point in your life, and I just thought of this. It's a bad idea. You let me know. I'm gonna ask you if there's a movie that you remember from that. Like, do you remember a movie that sticks out to you while you were at Vanderbilt that you're like, I saw this in the theater and it was like what everyone was buzzing about, or it really had an impact on your life or something like that?
God, I was devouring I mean, because, I the last couple of years I was there, I finally had roommates with a VCR, and we had a little,
Game changer.
Little convenience store on campus where you could rent movies. And then there was a really cool, weird video store that was near campus. And then I was, programming stuff at the cinema, and then also like taking film classes. So actually what I saw while living in Nashville for the first time was Nashville.
Oh, wow. Robert Altman.
Yeah. A movie that the city, when I was there in the 80s, the city still had very mixed feelings about it.
I'm sure. I would assume that they still do. I mean, I don't know.
Probably. Yeah. I'm not surprised. I think I know that when it premiered, a lot of country music people were like, what is this, and why are you insulting us this way? And its legacy remains complicated. Although I did have one professor who still had a bumper sticker on his van for the fake presidential candidate from that movie. Like, I guess it appears in the film somewhere. So I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, that movie really, I had seen Rules of the Game before. When I'd taken a college level film class while I was in high school.
Classic.
But seeing Nashville really kind of this notion of like, oh my God, there's all these stories and they all come together, and he's commenting about popular culture and about politics and the intersection and and it was very cool.
Awesome. And so you devour so many movies there and really for the rest of your life, but you leave Vanderbilt. And at what point did you realize my dream? And you've said this to me, I don't know, I've known you for 6 years. I consider you a dear friend. You've said my vocation is my avocation, or vice versa, however you say that, where I basically get to do what I have loved since I was a child, which is so awesome. And I get to do that as well. And I highly recommend it. When did you realize it's going to happen? Is there a job or are we not there yet?
We're probably not there yet. I mean, like my first major job out of immediately after graduating, I stayed in Nashville for a while. I worked at the very first Tower Records in Nashville opened that summer, and I worked in their video department, which was great because like I became the guy in the video rental thing where people would look for me and ask for me because I could tell them what's the name of that movie with the blah, blah, and I could, if I didn't know offhand, I could look it up and figure it out. You should have had
an Alonso's Picks section.
Alas, they did not offer me one. But yeah, so I was kind of knocking around doing that. My first big job out of college was for the Dallas Times Herald, a daily paper that no longer exists. But they hired me to be their pop music guy for reasons I still don't understand. And it was a bad fit, and that wasn't my area of expertise, and it lasted about 6 months, and it was, whatever. But then I started working for the film festival there, the USA Film Festival, and I was various people's assistants at different times and helping out with programming and doing Q&As with guests and all the logistical stuff. And then I moved out to Los Angeles for the first time for a couple of years, where I was doing some more writing and other things. But then in '95, I got the opportunity to come back to Dallas and be the program director for USA. And so that, I think, to me, felt like the first real sort of like full-time established, I'm really doing it job. And I was there for about 5 years.
It's almost similar to the trajectory of an actor wanting to like break it into showbiz. It's like they have these odd jobs that like they gleaned experience, or they got this one thing that they knew how to do until they finally get what they wanted to do. That's fascinating. Atlanta, and I've never asked you this before, but Atlanta, Nashville, Dallas, because your whole life has been spent in the South.
Yeah.
Was there any culture shock moving from one of those cities? Because those are three of the biggest cities in the South.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of a bigger city in the South than Dallas, Nashville, or Atlanta. I think those might be the three biggest. Was there any culture shock, or was it pretty much Texas is a little different than Tennessee, which is a little different than Georgia? Barbecue's better in Texas, fried chicken, and or was it a culture shock?
Yeah, no, they were pretty much kind of all versions of each other. I mean, like, I remember when I moved to Texas in 1989, I had never seen such large American flags in my life. That was immediately like, oh, what are we doing here? And it's next to, that's a church. I thought it was a car dealership. Okay.
If you can't get patriotic about the Gulf War, I don't know what you can get patriotic about, Alonso.
But yeah, I think growing up in Atlanta, kind of you get the feel of what the South is and what it has to offer, and the humidity and whatever else. And so yeah, Nashville and Dallas were variations on that theme, but nothing too shocking.
Did any of those feel more like as an adult, more like home? Like I could live here forever, or did you not feel that till you got to California?
Interesting. Yeah, I think, I haven't lived in Atlanta since, I lived there for the summer in 1987 when I was interning at the paper there. But I haven't like lived there since then. So I think of that as a place that I could perhaps wind up because, of my 6 siblings, 5 of them live in the greater Atlanta area. So, that certainly could work. Nashville, I haven't spent a lot of time in since graduating from college, although I'm going this summer in July. I'm going to be doing a screening at the Belcourt, which I'm very excited about. And it seems like I remember when I was there, it felt like, oh, this is like Atlanta about 10 years earlier. Yeah, not in a bad way, but just in terms of like the sprawl, and the Atlanta I left is not nearly the size of the Atlanta that people think of it now. When I was there, like Alpharetta felt like another planet, and now it's just like, oh no, it's straight up the 400, and you're right there. Yeah, and then Dallas, I a lot of people that I love there, but I mean.
The American flags, they're massive. I don't know what you want
given the current state of politics, I don't think I could live in Texas or Tennessee right now or anytime in the near future.
Yeah, more than fair. And a quick festival question, then we'll get back on track. Do you have and if you don't want to share this, that is, you're going to not share it. I already know in my head you're not going to share it. I've done a few Q&As. I like to do this, what we're doing right now. Like, it is, I love to interview people. It's fun. But Q&As really do, just like interviews, rise and fall on the guest and their ability to articulate and be game and ready to play. And if not, it gets tough in a hurry. Was there a moment you were on stage doing a Q&A and you just went, well, F this. I am up here and I have just been put in the middle of the ocean without a life raft?
I had several. Yeah. The ones that leaped to mind, one that was funny and one that was infuriating. The funny one was Christopher Walken.
Oh my God. You got to do a Q&A with Christopher Walken?
Oh,
how
yeah.
have I not heard this story?
Oh, I don't know how. This is a good one. So he's Christopher Walken. And so like all of his answers wind up being kind of short and if not just like monosyllabic. And I'm like trying to find some, and the things like sometimes, as I'm sure this with interviews, sometimes you have to just sort of like keep hitting targets and then hope for the one that's going to open the door, like one time with Dennis Hopper, couldn't really get him talking about movies or art, but then I brought up Waterworld, which had not opened yet, and he went off on this how much he loved Hawaii and how good the golf was there, and I'm like, all right, well, at least we're talking about something.
No kidding.
Yeah, but Walken, I couldn't find it, so I start taking questions from the audience, and somebody goes, what was it like working with De Niro on The Deer Hunter?
Oh, man.
And his answer was, fine.
That movie doesn't delve into anything deep. It's a real
easy
watch.
What is there to say, really?
Show it to the kids. It was fine, whatever. But I will say this about Walken. People they didn't show up to see him wax poetic, right? They have to know if you're watching a Christopher Walken anything, him saying more than 10 words at a time would come as a surprise, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is the guy who takes the punctuation out of his
Yeah.
scripts. Like he just, he's on his own
He's the
plane. And that's fine.
Cormac McCarthy of actors. He,
The infuriating one though was I still respect him as an actor, and it drives me crazy that I do because this was the worst experience. One of the worst experiences of my life was doing a Q&A with Tommy Lee Jones. And he ask any interviewer, ask any journalist who's ever had to interview him, and they will tell you a similar story. He just is not here to play. And here's the thing. We were honoring him at the film festival. Like we were giving him an award. He agreed to come. It wasn't like he was stuck at a press junket and in a bad mood. He came by choice, and he was still a complete D to me.
Yeah. He strikes me as someone who is just, the publicity tour is his worst nightmare. Like he would do 10 movies a year if he never had to talk to anybody. And I hear an interview with him. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I see him in like Lincoln as Thaddeus Stevens. And I'm like, this guy is just unbelievable. And
that's the thing. I see him and I'm like, oh, damn it. I wish you weren't so good.
No kidding.
My favorite part of that though, was he turned his back on me literally during the Q&A, just started taking questions himself from the audience. And the first person he picked was a kid who asked him what his worst movie was.
Oh man, no, you just don't know any better. I've been a kid at a festival asking an embarrassing question before, but that's tough there. That's tough sledding.
Yeah.
Kathy Lasota in the chat, BrambleGymPlus.com. Kathy always has very hot takes, and I caught this out of the corner of my eye, and I just can't believe it. She says that Blast from the Past is Walken's best movie.
May I suggest you see more Christopher Walken movies?
Any of them. I love it's great. It's as per usual, a hot take from Kathy. I don't normally ask this because I don't know a lot about people's family lives or them personally, but I'm going to ask you, when did you meet Dave?
Sure. When I moved back to Dallas, actually, although technically the first time we met was before I moved to Los Angeles. It was 1992.
Oh, this sounds like a story he's told a few times. I love this.
I've told it a few times. So George Bush was coming to town for some sort of like big Baptist, Lollapalooza get together in downtown Dallas. Oh, I'm getting there. I'm getting there, Dave. I'm telling the story. And Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson.
Yeah.
So
the Holy Trinity.
Exactly. Yeah. So the gays of Dallas showed up to protest, and I had been protesting for a while with ACT UP, and a woman that I worked with at the film festival at the time had gone to college with Dave, and she brought him to what amounted to, I guess, his first big like gay political action. And she introduced us. We said, hi, hello, nice to meet you. And then like, that was it.
Man.
And then years later, we crossed paths again, and he remembered me because when I had lived in Dallas before, I was a co-host of an LGBTQ community radio show. And so when he met me, he knew my name and knew who I was from that thing. So when we met again, he was like, oh, right, you. And it went from there.
I love it. That's fantastic. Of course. And the rest is history. Obviously, you moved back to Dallas, and then you stay there. You get an actual film critic's job,
film festival.
I'm sorry, film festival job. Excuse me. And then what brings you back to California?
I kind of knew that I wanted to come back like the whole time. Like as much as I was thrilled to get the job and was excited to come back to Dallas and do the gig for a while, I had lived in LA long enough to know like this is really what's happening. This is really what works for me. So it was always sort of on the agenda that at some point I was going to come back. And so I did 5 festivals, which I thought was a good, a nice round number. And then, coerced Dave into moving back here with me, which at first he did not particularly want to do, but has since obviously come to love it.
Yeah, I would hope so. You guys have been there a while. If he's still holding
25 years,
that's a tough household there. Before we get to California, because I've got plenty of questions, obviously, what's the hardest part for you in running a film festival? What's the thing you're like, I got to do this? Like for me, it's any paperwork.
Sure. I mean, I'll tell you, thank goodness I did not have to fundraise. Like that was somebody else's job. And thank goodness, because I would be so bad at that. But just from my little corner of it, the tricky part is First you go from thinking, oh God, I'm not going to have enough movies. I'm not going to see enough. Like you're like trying to fill these slots. And then you start putting things on the board. You're like, oh God, I have too many movies for my thoughts. So I could never quite gauge going in like, okay, stop now. And you'll have just the right number, which is kind of how I write, like if I have a word count, I'll just go bananas. Then I have to like chop.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough spot to be in. The selection has to be the hardest thing in my head that would happen there. All right, let's get to California. What are you doing out there first when you're first out there in the early 90s?
My first job was working for Film Independent, which at the time was called IFP West, which is they put on the Spirit Awards every year, and they are an organization that works with indie filmmakers, and they do like labs for producers and directors and screenwriters. They do kind of seminars and different educational programs through the year and screenings and that kind of thing. So I worked for them for a while. And then after about a year, I got a job at The Advocate, the national, at the time it was called the National Gay and Lesbian News Magazine. They're probably the LGBTQ plus news magazine now. And I was an editor there from 2000 to 2006, which was, it was an interesting period to be at a queer publication because like the number of out celebrities was small enough that we could put them all on a bulletin board, basically. we still had a section. My editor had a section called the Glass Closet for people like Sean Hayes, Jodie Foster, Anderson Cooper, who hadn't come out yet, but we were like waiting that it was going to happen at some point. I don't think any of them did during my tenure there, but we got there eventually.
It's so wild. I mean, my only recollection of not Anderson Cooper, the other two is they were out like that. I don't have a recollection of them before then because of my age. So that's
sure.
wild. So you talk about The Advocate in the book and some of the history of it and some of the other early organizations for LGBTQ plus representation. You do that job as editor and you liked it. When are we shifting to film criticism?
Well, I was the arts and entertainment editor, so I could occasionally, I got to do a few, reviews every so often, either for the magazine or for the website. And, I had a 6-7 year run there. And then like in the time that I was there, the magazine changed ownership and things were going in a weird direction. And then it wound up changing ownership a couple more times after I left. And it just, but I kind of felt like the time had come to sort of press on. So after that, you get into the world of freelance and things sort of start bopping around a lot. So for a year, I edited a website that AOL was starting called Queersided that was supposed to be sort of a fun, LGBTQ plus like pop culture site. And then they decided instead they were going to buy HuffPo. And so then they just unceremoniously not only killed it, but like erased everything that was on it. Like they sold the domain name to Logo and it just became like it would just take you to Logo. But everything I wrote, everything everybody else wrote for that site just poof into the internet ether. I mean, I guess you can find some of it on the Internet Wayback Machine, but I was really annoyed. I had some good stuff there. Brutal. I started reviewing movies for MSNBC.com, which I did for several years, for like 5 years. And then I think in 2013, I'm fuzzy on dates. I think is when I started reviewing for The Wrap. And then while I was doing that, I was also had started programming, working in the program department for Outfest, which is the Los Angeles LGBTQ plus film festival. So like a lot of my peers these days who don't have like one full-time job that's the whole thing, a lot of us have sort of one foot in reviewing films for websites or radio stations or podcasts or whatever, and then one foot also in film festival programming.
So I've got a few more questions there, but this is germane to this discussion. In the book,
sure.
You talk about how, for a long time, LGBTQ plus films are hard to come by and hard to get. Still to this day, you talk about how a movie breaks through and becomes more modern success, and then we believe there's going to be a floodgate opened. After Brokeback Mountain is the best example, but even after Moonlight, but even earlier, there's some times when it's like, there's a Dog Day Afternoon, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden there's this big twist in the movie. I don't want to spoil that one, like Citizen Kane. Aaron may get really upset, but so you keep saying we're expecting this, it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. However, a lot of your time covering LGBTQ plus like made entertainment was before access was widely available to it. So when you're editing for the Advocate, are you editing for the people that are reading the periodical going, I'm really writing this for the people that can get their hands on this? Or are you writing it for the people that I know this isn't reaching people that want to see this in Omaha, Nebraska, but I want them to know it's out there? Like, what's the point of view?
Oh, the latter. I mean, first of all, it's not like there was, so much LGBTQ plus material in the culture that we could pick and choose. Like, if it was showing at one theater in New York, if it was a film that was on the festival circuit, like, we were on it, because we needed to talk about something. But also, like, by this point, you've got, I guess maybe VHS is still happening, but you've definitely got DVD going on. So it's not like these movies weren't eventually going to be more accessible. But yeah, a lot of times these are movies that are going to open in New York and LA, maybe San Francisco and Chicago. They're not going to have, huge theatrical footprints, but they are eventually going to get to people. And that's the thing that changes as home video happens. But I mean, like, we have to remember there's a very long period before that. But when I was living in Dallas, when I moved there in 89, there was a store there called Tape Lenders, and they had a really big gay and lesbian section that had, like, The Killing of Sister George and The Ritz and, Boys in the Band and all those kind of movies. And that was sort of my, like, again, so much of my interest in this has been kind of self-taught. I just would go in and, like, all right, what have I not seen? What am I going to rent, that I've read about in Vito Russo, or that I know that is a thing, but I haven't watched yet. So that became like my sort of postgraduate, queer studies film school.
I love it. That's fantastic. Some film criticism questions, then book questions, but I want you to talk about podcasting briefly. It is a huge part of your life,
Sure.
But you were an early adopter to making podcasts. And I have made a podcast in your home, and it is like we are in the past making a podcast. It is, there's a tape record. There is technology that I didn't know people were still using, but you and Dave have been making Linoleum Knife for how many years now?
Yeah.
10?
No, it'll be 14. In November.
So
yeah.
2010. I mean, this is those early this is like Mark Maron territory. Like, this is early adopters to film podcasting. What was the impetus to make the podcast, and what has that done for you and Dave and your careers?
Sure. Well, I mean, even then I kind of felt like we were coming in late because other people had been doing it. And my dear friend Gray Drake, she and her friend Ariana used to do a podcast called The Popcorn Mafia. And I ran into them at a theater in town. They were like, "Oh my God, we want to have you on our podcast." And I was like, "Great. What's a podcast?" So Gariana had to sort of explain to me, like, what it was and how it worked. I was like, "Oh, okay. Sure, fine. Yeah, this is like 2008, 2009. And so I went on, and I think Dave went on later, and that was sort of my limited perception of what podcasts were. And then in 2009, 2010, I spent a while doing a TV show on the now dead Current network called The Rotten Tomatoes Show. I was one of their regular contributing critics. And then there was another show on IFC called The Grid, that was sort of all about, like, here's what's happening this week in all these, in film and on the internet and video games and yada. And both of those shows got canceled at around the same time. And, I was my first exposure to that kind of thing. I hadn't really worked in TV much at all. And so I just remember at one point being really dejected. And I said, "Dave, I want us to do a podcast because I want to show that nobody can cancel but us."
I love it.
And so Gray had some older equipment that she sold us, and that's kind of how we started. And, it is turned into this thing where, now we have a really, I'm not going to say a gigantically successful Patreon. We're not Neil Gaiman, but I mean, like, we make a nice tidy sum every month, and it helps, pay the rent and things. And it gives us an outlet to do anything we want, I think there are a lot of publications that we've worked for that are not particularly interested in the 3-hour Portuguese movie that plays on 2 screens. But that movie is catnip for Dave White, and he wants to see it. And if I can see it too, great. And we're going to talk about it. And I think our listeners are people who love the fact that, yes, we will tell you about the new Spider-Man movie. We will tell you about, the Fall Guy, but we're also going to talk about the 3-hour Portuguese movie. And so, it's a fun experience for us. The Patreon shows have allowed us to dig deeper into categories like television and food in a way that nobody was going to certainly, offer us the opportunity to do for anybody else's behalf. So yeah, it's been a blast. I love doing it. And that it's gotten me into other places like your show, like Maximum Film, Breakfast All Day, which, Christy and I and Matt actually decided to create after, the flick got canceled.
Whatever happened to that? I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's again, it's a thing where like, if so much of media has been about like, I'm writing for this publication that somebody else owns, or I am a talking head on this TV show that somebody else owns. And what's great about podcasting is it's yours. Unless you're on a network or something, or it's, some NPR show, like if you're on Serial or whatever, for most people, podcast is the thing they are doing in their garage at their kitchen table, and they can post episodes whenever they want. They can pull the plug whenever they want. They can talk about whatever they want. And, it's really liberating, especially if you've been working in the media and having to deal with other people's parameters.
If you're speaking my language, obviously, my question though is this is a great,
it's a good time anytime. Just do it.
Yeah. Big fun. Maybe 6. Podcasting does everything that you said it does. But it also gives everyone a microphone. So
sure.
Jokers like me, I'm literally looking at me who have like very little film education and no journalism experience. And I can talk into a microphone. And if we gain a following, then people are listening to me talk about movies the same way they think in their head, the same way they're listening to an actual professional film critic talk about it. So I understand that you don't have to take a side there because you do both. And I also understand that it's been beneficial to you. But is there a frustration in the pivot from, everyone's always blamed the critics when they don't like them. If the critics don't like something, you guys, if you write a pan for a Marvel movie, people are coming for you. Right? And that's part of the gig. And I think most critics enjoy that. They relish that because they know that they're just giving an opinion and it's not their job to please anyone. And that's what makes them great film critics. But is there a frustration or I guess, just an understanding of a pivot, knowing that on Rotten Tomatoes, like you said, where there's 300 reviews to the latest Nolan movie, and there's a top critic section, but people are going to see a tomato or a green splat, and in their heads, for the majority of people that use that site, they are correlating that with journalism and a bastion of film criticism. What does that do to you on a day-to-day basis?
I think one of the upsides of the internet and podcasting or whatever else is it is a democratic process. It has opened the floodgates. It has taken away the idea of gatekeeping, that the media used to have. The downside is that it has taken away the gatekeeping and opened the floodgates, And so I think it becomes incumbent then upon consumers of not just movies, but of film criticism and of news on the internet in general, to be more demanding about like, who's telling me this? What's their background? And it's not like you have to have a specific background. If you're listening to a show of people who super love Star Wars or Marvel movies and their context is other Star Wars movies and other Marvel movies, then fine. And then that's the conversation you want to hear and be a part of. Great. It exists for you and you can take it. But, I think you need to know what it is that people are coming from. I mean, you are always the first to say, hey, look, I'm not a real film critic. But I mean, you know what? You studied film, and I've been talking about this with you for years, and you know what you're talking about. Like, it's not like the Wizard of Oz did not hand me a certificate that says I'm a film critic,
True.
We're all making it up as we go along, And so you've been putting in the time of sitting through these, a very specific kind of filmed entertainment, but you're still watching them all, and you are analyzing and coming up with, this is why this works, this is
I'm
why
gonna
this
keep
doesn't
this
work.
audio clip as my certificate of a newly minted film critic. Is what I'm gonna do. That's all I could have.
You and I, we did a podcast for a year
right.
where we talked about
right.
movies, including Citizen
That's
Kane.
right. Most of which I had not seen, by the way.
But you know what? But when the time came to talk about it, you totally held your end up.
I did.
So,
well, I appreciate that. And I, to be clear, and this is a little back history on that podcast. I don't know if anybody cares, but I came to Alonso with the idea called My Movie Homework, where we do a movie that's out in theaters now, and Alonso's like, if you like that, you really should watch this. And I go and do the homework, and he came up with an idea that made me a lot more esteemed as a host because we were watching movies and both talking about them. My idea was, I don't know anything, and Alonso's idea was, well, let's act like you do know something, which is so kind of him to do that.
Hey, and we talked to film critics who I
listen,
respect, and filmmakers, and you never came off like the yokel.
Well,
so
God bless you.
Give yourself some credit.
I never was for looking at the times of the movie theaters, but did I look at Rotten Tomatoes every day as a teenager? Did I know the names of not just Roger Ebert, but Michael Phillips and A.O. Scott and Alonso Duralde and Richard Roper and Owen Gleiberman and Claudia Pugh and on and on and on. So, like, I knew all that. Like, I knew all that as a teenager. And so that, for me, it was just a dream come true for me. So much appreciated. I have to ask this because I want to be, we've got other things to do today. You've written 4 books. 4 books. Yeah. 101 must-see movies for gay men. And Hollywood Pride, representation, LGBTQ representation in film, a history of it. And then you've written 2 other books that are both about Christmas.
Yes.
Where does that... And I probably should have done this in the childhood, but you don't have just like an affinity for Christmas. You will say things that remind me of my buddy Brandon, like, well, just to get a quick fix, I turned on the Christmas movie on Friday night here in July, and I'm like, you have a problem, sir. Like that, where does that come from? And you can tell the story about Bibbs if you want, introducing you to Hallmark movies, but
sure.
Just You and Christmas being synonymous, where does that stem from?
I've always loved Christmas. I mean, one of the benefits of being in my family, in being a big family, was that Christmas was always really great. Like, my mom made an effort to really, put on like the dinner and just all the stuff surrounding it. For me as a kid, I'm sort of the change of life baby. Like, my nearest sibling to me is 5 years older. My oldest sister is 13 years older. So much of my childhood involved my siblings being off at college or whatever. And Christmas was when people came home. And so that was a really great time of year. I was thrilled to see them. And so I've always loved Christmas. And then I've always loved movies. So inevitably, I guess it was the 2 were going to come together. And over the years, as a critic, I would be at publications, and December would roll around and be like, oh, give me a list of 5 Christmas movies that people don't realize are Christmas movies, or, that kind of thing. And so I thought, there's maybe like a book here, because nobody else had really written one like that. And, I pitched it, and it happened, and it's amazing. But yeah, I have now, I sort of joke, like I'm the June guy and the December guy. I have my gay film books and my Christmas film books. And so that's when, please book me on your podcast.
That's your niche. All right. One film criticism question. Is there any, I'm sure there are several, because watching things multiple times helps me a bunch. And sometimes I was just wrong about a movie. I've said that Memento, the first time I watched it, I hated it. The second time I loved it. You saw The Holdovers at a film festival, and I remember you going, I don't know, it was okay. And then you watched it again. You're like, no, I really, really like this movie. Is there a movie, like a big name movie, not something in the weeds, a big name movie for our listeners out there that you wrote a review on, like you had to turn it in the next day or whatever, and you gave it a pan review, and then upon second viewing, you remember just a stark, like, man, I swing and a miss here. I didn't get this one.
I mean, not so much with movies that I reviewed, just because I think if I pan something, it's unlikely that I'm ever going to see it again. The one that came up actually was when we were doing a film and a movie. I had seen Bringing Up Baby in college and thought, it's no What's Up, Doc, and I thought like Katharine Hepburn was kind of overdoing it. It was all a little too manic or whatever. And then I watched it again when we did an episode, and I was like, oh, Oh no! This is like one of the great comedies ever made. So yeah, absolutely. Revisiting films like just yesterday, I went to see Challengers for a second time and loved that movie the first time. But I caught all these details that I missed the first time. You don't always, especially if a movie's throwing a lot at you, it's hard to absorb it all in one viewing. So I wish I had time to see more things more than once. But yeah, absolutely, my mind has changed.
Well, and I always say in these interviews, there's no wrong answers, but you not giving Oppenheimer another chance was the correct answer, and you didn't. And it's fine. It's whatever. It's
Who's
fine.
got the time, Daniel?
I do. I know because I know you very well. I know What's Up Doc is a national treasure of yours. Willy Wonka or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
No, Willy Wonka.
Yeah, it is Willy Wonka, not Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I'm sorry. I always mix those up. Yeah, Willy Wonka, the Chocolate Factory, another one of your favorites. Any other just, before we dive into Hollywood Pride, any other just absolute like Mount Rushmore movies for you?
If Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is on TV, I'm watching that baby all the way to the end.
Right on. I love it. Fantastic. All right, let's talk about this book.
Yes.
This book is amazing. It's beautiful. Even if you just flip through the pictures, it's worthy of you buying it. Having said that, I'm a history major, film minor, so maybe the book was just for me. But basically what you do over the course of, just over a half dozen chapters is you take a time period of film history and you give a historical context for what is going on first. And it is great. As someone who taught history for 20 years, providing context is important. You start to understand and empathize more when you understand the context, and context sort of drives that culture. So you do that first, then you talk about the films, and then you talk about the icons or the people that were involved in that era. This changes obviously over the course of film history, and it is wonderful. And I have a few questions about several of those eras of history, but you and I got a chance to interview actually twice filmmaker Justin Simeon. And on one occasion, he said, the history of black cinema is the history of cinema. And for me, as someone who knew a lot of what you were talking about in the last two chapters, and some of what you were talking about in the middle, but hardly anything from an LGBTQ perspective before then, I just got the feeling that you could make that same argument for LGBTQ cinema. That the history of not quite to the extent of black cinema, but there is a lasting legacy here that I think people just don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, Justin talks about how, like, we look at the sort of the dawn of cinema. We talk about, Birth of a Nation and Steamboat Willie. It's like, what are we doing here? With queer movies, I think it's more about like, well, we've always been there. Like we've been behind the camera and we've been in front of the camera for as long as there's been a camera. And then as far as like, the actual storytelling goes, I think, you look back at like these early attempts to tell really sort of serious, gay love stories in the German Weimar period before the Nazis come in and like destroy all the prints of everything. And then in American comedy, these sort of 1-2 reelers, you get these sort of like mincy, effeminate characters, or you get like, big burly comedians, in drag or whatever. And it's like, people know what that means. They get what's being told there. So, I mean, like it appears throughout. And then you have the production code come in the 30s, which, outright bans the portrayal of, sex perversion, which is how they umbrella the whole thing. But, if you're a smart enough screenwriter and director, you can kind of like have these characters where anyone paying attention is like, oh, okay, I see what we're doing here.
That's what you say in the book. When the production code goes away, that's the first time we think we're going to see if the floodgates open of some more queer cinema. It doesn't happen. But you also point out, this is so great. One of my favorite movies of all time is The Maltese Falcon, and I'm reading this book and I get to like, oh, what are the films with LGBTQ representation? And Maltese Falcon's like the second one of the chapter, and I was like, what? And then I look at it and I read it, and you talk about the Cairo character, you talk about some musical like intros, and all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, absolutely, yeah, I'd 100% see that. Was that a fascinating part of this journey, or is that something that you've always just kind of clocked your whole life?
Well, I mean, I believe me, for this entire book, I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of giants, So like Vito Russo talks about that in the book, The Celluloid Closet. They show the clip of Peter Lorre as Joel Cairo in the movie of The Celluloid Closet. So I mean, there are people along the way who've been clocking this stuff, and I'm just sort of like sweeping up behind them and reminding people that they're out there. But I think it is. What I'm glad that you point out the historical segments. I appreciate that, because I think for a lot of people who pick up this book, they aren't necessarily going to know that history. If you're writing a book about like World War II in cinema, yeah, people have a general idea of what you're talking about, and maybe they might need to know about specific dates for, different things going on. But like a lot of LGBTQ plus history is not really taught a lot in American schools. So I kind of felt the need to be like, all right, so this is what was going on, and so thank you. I that context was important.
Well, and it's also like
include.
For me, as someone who like I taught college level U.S. history, that's part of the course. And you put a lot of emphasis on the Stonewall riots when you do that. If you read this book, and it's literally a page a chapter, guys, it's not like he's writing a history book, but it gives you context of how there was a lot more going on. But, even with just basic riots, like in Los Angeles and a few other cities, of what was going on, how these protests, those things take decades, centuries even, to come to fruition. And so having that context really does drive the enjoyment of the book. At least it did for me. I mean, that was a huge deal for me, no doubt about it. And the other thing I love, and you do this for 3 straight chapters, there's a chapter on the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and then you kind of do 60s and 70s together, and then you do 80s and a little bit of 90s. That's the AIDS epidemic, and then you do like modern day. I think that's correct. Am I missing one in there? I'm missing one in there, I think.
You pretty much got it. Yeah.
So in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you have a Hitchcock interstitial in your book, which is, it's perfect. It's like, what was Hitchcock doing in this? He had so much even coded queer representation in his movies that he gets an interstitial in 3 chapters of this book. And it is, for me, someone who, once again, is more of a layman when it comes to this stuff, Rope is up there. I know it's going to be up there. I adore that movie. But even I learned, I didn't know Cary Grant was up for the role of Rope and was like, no, this is too gay. I'm not doing it. Is basically what Cary Grant said. And so
and Montgomery Clift.
So how much like that is something, I don't know if I have a question here. I just found, like, if you're a film buff, I think there's even something for you. Like, you're not a film critic, but you're somebody that loves movies. Hitchcock's all over this book. It's not like you're just pulling deep into the crevices of whatever a film is to find movies. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, with Hitchcock, like I think most filmmakers that get sort of like their one big moment, and we talk about all the stuff. But the way that he just kind of keeps weaving these characters through, whether it's Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca, or Bruno and Strangers on a Train, like it was just so interesting. I wanted to kind of just sort of like touch base. What's he up to this decade? Who's he giving us? What's he writing about? What is he? What's he slipping past the censors, basically? So yeah, and because this is a book that TCM is putting out, like obviously I needed to focus on classic Hollywood as much as possible, but I really give my editors credit for letting me sort of like have these sidebars about like, well, let's talk about, underground experimental film of the 1950s. Let's talk about, pornography of the late 60s and early 70s, because in a lot of cases, this is where actual LGBTQ plus storytelling is happening, not on the studio lot, but like in, some tiny apartment in New York City on 8mm, and it's all part of the larger story here. You don't get to the new queer cinema of the 90s without the Hollywood stuff and the experimental stuff. So, it all comes together as part of the story.
It's so funny. You talk about Beyond the Valley of the Dolls in the book, and I read Matt Singer's Opposable Thumbs, and hearing those two sides of that story, like, hearing some of the dialogue that Ebert writes and your version versus Ebert's version from Matt Singer was great. It was such a fun time, and I'm so glad it was included in there.
Oh yeah, no, it's this crazy thing where like you get to 1970 and 20th Century Fox is like, like most of the studios in town, reeling from having spent a lot of money on movies that didn't recoup. In Fox's case, there was Cleopatra. There was also Star, which was like Julie Andrews' big follow-up to The Sound of Music, which tanked. And so they're like, okay, the kids, the baby boomer generation is coming of age now. They don't want to see these mega musicals. They want to go see Easy Rider. How do we get to the kids? I know, we're going to make a couple of X-rated movies, and they make Myra Breckenridge and Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which are fascinating films in their own way, but also tanked.
Yeah, there was a whole X-rated, like the push, then all of a sudden it just didn't work out. And was it Midnight Cowboy? You said is the only X-rated movie to win Academy Award that was
Best Picture, yeah.
And then it became rated R later on. It's all fascinating. I also was very, very thankful in reading the book that because of hanging out with you and doing a couple of podcasts with you, I've gotten to talk to what amounts to be legends of queer cinema. And I didn't probably at the time talking to them really respect that. Like reading about Cheryl Dunye, I was just like, why? Whoa. So I feel like you garner a new perspective. It is fascinating history that hasn't been told often, like you say, in our education system, or not at all, unfortunately, at some time. And even for people that love movies, I think that you're going to find a lot here. My last question about this book, although I could talk about it all day. My last question about the book isn't Crash such an amazing movie?
The David Cronenberg one? Yes.
I actually want to know. I couldn't find it. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. I didn't do much research. What was your review on Crash when it came out? And for those of you that don't know, since he's drinking some water and trying to choose his words widely, Crash won the Best Picture the year that Brokeback Mountain came out. That Brokeback Mountain was a shoo-in deservedly for this award. And it was pretty much decided that, and you talk about this in the book, that kind of old Hollywood had just decided we're not going to watch this movie and we're not going to be a part of it. And so I guess they created a coalition around, this made me think of another question, so it's not my last question. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Created a coalition around Crash to make it, because it also deals with social issues. And so it seemed like a salve they could put on their bigoted wounds. Do you know what I mean? Like that's what it seemed like. What did you think of it?
Oh, no. Well, I mean, when I saw the movie, I remember Dave and I went and saw it, and it was a half full theater. And so we could tell that if we were going to laugh at something, we had to just sort of punch each other in the leg because we didn't want to be disrespectful to other people who were digging the movie. And we punched each other in the leg a lot. And he would frequently later refer to, I love the scene where racism pushes Sandra Bullock down the stairs. But no, Kenny Turan of the Los Angeles Times, the day after the Oscars that year, wrote about how, there was this concerted effort among older, more conservative Academy members to not watch Brokeback Mountain, to not acknowledge Brokeback Mountain. But the idea was, but if they voted for Crash, then that could be seen as they were doing something about the race problem in America.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's tough. And that leads me, and this is, I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but, or just a sell of the book. Number one was the history context for me and how much that helped me and really drew me into the book. I think number two for me is, I think a lot of people outside of Hollywood or, coastal elite, whatever you want to call it, they get this feeling that Hollywood's run by all of these elitist people who are just pushing an agenda. And if you read this book, you will find that LGBTQ plus representation and people fighting for it were fighting and are fighting regularly for representation against Hollywood, not with them. They didn't join arms and go, Hollywood, let's do this thing together. Typically, Hollywood is standing in the way of representation.
Yeah, when pundits talk about the woke agenda to make all of our shows queer and destroy our children's lives, I'm like, Y'all are anointing us with a power we have never had. Like, every jot of representation we've managed to get over the years has been hard won. So yeah, you're right. It is absolutely the opposite.
Yeah,
of that.
you still celebrate every time there is gay representation or queer representation in a Hallmark movie, and so that should tell you all you need to know. Like, even at the base level of Christmas TV movies, like, representation matters. It's important. And representation matters on family-friendly entertainment as much as it matters on X-rated Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
If not more
so. I would agree with that as well. It's all right here in this book, Hollywood Pride, a celebration of LGBTQ plus representation and perseverance in film. It's out May 14th. You can pre-order it right now wherever you order books. Also pre-order the Audible copy as well. That's going to be a journey. Alonso, I love you, buddy. This has been so much fun. It really, really has.
You're the best, sir. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad you like the book. I'm sure we'll dig into it at Bramble Jam.
Absolutely, we will. Even Bramble Fest, maybe.
Bramble Fest, yeah, sorry, you're right.
Until then, may I be not the first one to wish you a very Merry Christmas. Deck the Hallmarks of Bramble Jam podcast is produced by Aaron Shea.
What?
For more information on Deck the Hallmark, you can go to deckthehallmark.com. For more information on the Deck the Hallmark family, you can go to bramblejamplus.com. Deck the Hallmark is presented by Philo TV. For a free trial of Philo, go to philo.tv/DTH.